Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a great Tuesday. How are you doing? Welcome back to another video here on the channel. Today we have some important information about the Detroit Lions that every fan needs to know. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. And of course, I want to hear your opinion in the comments. Now, without wasting any time, let's get right into it because the Detroit Lions just made a move in training camp that raises a very important question about how they want to build their offensive line. And honestly, this is one of those decisions that deserves a much closer look. Juice Scruggs is still working his way back from a groin injury, and during practice, the Lions decided to split center reps between Scruggs and Tate Ratledge. On the surface, that might sound like a simple adjustment because Scruggs is being eased back into action, but the way Detroit handled the offensive line gives us a lot more to think about. Scruggs was back in pads for his first practice, and the team clearly wanted to manage his workload. He started most of the team series, but he would leave halfway through some of them, especially toward the end of practice. When that happened, the Lions did not simply replace him and keep everything else the same. Instead, Tate Ratledge moved inside to center, Christian Mahogany shifted from left guard to right guard, and Ben Bartch came in at left guard. That allowed Detroit to accomplish several things at once. They could evaluate Ratledge at center, give Bartch valuable first-team reps now that he was healthy enough to participate, and see Mahogany working from the right side. That sounds logical when you look at the purpose of the drill, but there is another side to this decision that makes it much more interesting. Tate Ratledge is still developing as a guard. He is only entering his second year, and the Lions have already spent time working with him at that position. So the question becomes very simple. How much value is there in taking those guard repetitions away from him to give him additional work at center? This is especially important because Detroit already has Cade Mays in the picture. That makes the idea of another extended experiment with Ratledge at center feel different from what it might have looked like previously. There is a difference between experimenting with a young offensive lineman because you are trying to find the best possible fit and repeatedly moving him around when he still needs valuable development time at his primary position. And that is where this entire situation becomes fascinating. When Scruggs was playing center, the offensive line looked solid. But when Ratledge moved to center, the unit appeared more vulnerable against blitzes, and Ratledge had at least 2 botched snaps. That does not automatically mean the experiment is a failure. Training camp is exactly where these things are supposed to be tested, but it does tell us that there is a difference between putting the 5 most talented offensive linemen on the field and putting the 5 offensive linemen who create the best unit together. Those two things are not always the same. Detroit may be looking at Ratledge, Bartch, and Mahogany and believing that there is enough talent among those players to create a stronger overall combination, but talent alone does not guarantee cohesion. Offensive line play depends heavily on communication, timing, familiarity, and the ability of 5 players to work together as one unit. Moving one player to center affects 2 positions immediately, and sometimes the theoretical improvement at one spot can create a bigger problem somewhere else. That is exactly what the Lions appeared to be testing. The combination with Ratledge at center could potentially put 5 of Detroit's most talented offensive linemen on the field at the same time, but the cohesion was clearly not where it needed to be. And that matters because the Lions are also trying to develop chemistry on the right side of the offensive line. Christian Mahogany is entering his 3rd season, while Blake Miller is a rookie at right tackle. That means those players need as many repetitions together as possible. Miller needs to become comfortable with the player next to him, and the guard next to him needs to understand how the rookie reacts to different defensive looks, pressures, and movements. Every repetition matters when you are building that kind of relationship. Penei Sewell is also part of that equation. The expectation is that Mahogany and Sewell should be able to develop good chemistry, but there is an important point here. Having an elite player next to you can make things easier. The bigger concern is the development of the younger players around them. If the Lions are serious about building the best possible offensive line for the season, they cannot afford to spend too much time constantly changing the combinations without a clear reason. At the same time, it would be unfair to look at one practice and declare that Detroit has made a permanent decision. The report itself makes clear that this could simply be an evaluation. Ratledge may get more opportunities at center, the Lions may decide they like what they see, or they may quickly conclude that the experiment does not make enough sense and return him to guard. That is one of the difficult parts of training camp. When you try something new, the first day is rarely enough to determine whether it will work. Players need time to adjust, but there is also a limit to how much time you can spend experimenting. If Detroit truly believes Ratledge could be a better center option, then he needs enough repetitions to actually learn the position. But if the the plan is for him to be the right guard, those repetitions are equally important because he needs to develop alongside Blake Miller, so the Lions are walking a very thin line here. And while the offensive line situation is the biggest story coming out of this practice, the preseason game also gave us some very interesting individual performances that deserve attention. Amon-Ra St was one of the players who stood out, and in this case, the numbers backed up what we saw on the field. According to the information from the game analysis, Hassan recorded a 7% pass rush productivity grade, which ranked second among 117 qualifying defenders with at least 9 pass rush snaps. He produced 5 pressures on 21 pass rush snaps, which is an extremely impressive rate, and he also recorded 2 sacks and forced a fumble against the Bengals. That is the kind of performance that immediately gets your attention, but there is an important reality here. Hassan now has to show that he can continue producing against better offensive lines. Cincinnati's offensive line struggled, and that has to be taken into account when evaluating any defensive performance from this game. The production was real, the numbers were real, and the plays happened, but the next step is proving that this was not simply a product of the matchup. And then there is another competition that may be much more important than some fans realize. Roger McCreary is facing a battle for his roster spot, and rookie Keith Abney is becoming part of that conversation. McCreary played almost exclusively in the second half, which is certainly not the kind of usage you normally expect from a veteran trying to secure his place on the roster. That makes this competition worth watching very closely. However, McCreary responded on the field. He recorded an 82.1 run grade from PFF and an 86.3 coverage grade. He also allowed 0 completions on 2 targets. Those are strong numbers, especially for a player who may be fighting for his place on the team. But Abney was not far behind. The rookie recorded an 81.9 run grade, showing that he can also contribute against the run, and that this competition may not be going away anytime soon. Then there was Jacob Sailors, who may have provided one of the biggest surprises of the preseason game. The biggest positive was that he did not appear to suffer a serious injury after limping off the field. Beyond that, his performance caught attention from the coaching staff. Dan Campbell described him as a steady workhorse and said he was the most potent player on offense. Sailors also produced 6.38 yards after contact per attempt. That number is difficult to ignore. The bigger surprise was not simply that Sailors ran hard. He was already known as a player who could run with physicality. What stood out was the burst. Compared with last season, the improvement in his ability to accelerate and create speed was noticeable, including against Cincinnati's first-team defense. That changes the way you look at his potential role. Instead of simply being a running back who can give you physical carries, Sailors is showing signs that he may have more of the physical tools needed to make an impact. If the Lions need him to step into a bigger role because of an injury ahead of him, that becomes a much more encouraging possibility. And that brings us back to the biggest question coming out of this entire practice. The Lions are clearly searching for the right combination up front, and Tate Ratledge working at center has opened up a debate that goes far beyond one player moving to another position. It is about whether Detroit should prioritize its 5 most talented offensive linemen, or the 5 players who currently give the unit the best chemistry and consistency. The answer could have a major impact on how this offensive line develops throughout training camp. So, Lions fans, what do you think about Tate Ratledge getting reps at center alongside Juice Scruggs? Do you think Detroit should continue testing Ratledge there? Or should the Lions keep him focused on guard and let him build chemistry with the players around him? The biggest thing to understand here is that the Lions are not simply moving players around for the sake of moving them around. Every one of these repetitions is giving the coaching staff information, and that information can become extremely important when the regular season arrives. The center position is especially important because the player in the middle of the offensive line is responsible for much more than simply snapping the football. There is communication involved, there is protection recognition, and there is coordination with the guards on both sides. When you change the center, you are changing the way the entire interior of the offensive line communicates and reacts. That is why the performance with Juice Scruggs at center looked more stable, while the unit appeared more vulnerable when Tate Ratledge moved inside. And again, that does not mean Ratledge cannot play center. It means that at this moment, the combination has not shown the same level of cohesion. There is also something else worth remembering about what happened during this practice. Ratledge was not simply taking center repetitions while everybody else stayed in the same position. His move forced Christian Mahogany to shift from left guard to right guard, while Ben Bartch entered at left guard. So when you evaluate Ratledge at center, you also have to evaluate the entire combination around him. Maybe Ratledge eventually becomes comfortable enough at center that the entire group improves. Maybe Mahogany becomes comfortable on the right side. Maybe Bartch gives the Lions exactly what they need at guard. But that is a lot of variables to solve at the same time, and that is why the chemistry issue matters so much. Imagine having a rookie right tackle trying to establish himself, a second-year player learning the demands of his position, and then moving another player around the interior at the same time. The Lions can certainly test those combinations during training camp, but eventually they have to settle on a group and allow those 5 players to build the kind of communication that offensive lines need. That is especially true because one of the biggest strengths of a good offensive line is consistency. You want the guard to know exactly how the tackle next to him is going to react. You want the center to know when the guard is going to help him and when he needs to handle a defender himself. You want everybody to recognize pressure at the same time. Those things do not happen automatically. They come from repetition. That is why the question surrounding Ratledge is not simply, can he play center? The better question is, does moving